Our next speaker is Pooran Arbabi. Pooran Arbabi is a political and human rights activist who started her activities in early 1980s in response to violation of human rights in Iran. She is a board member of California Society for Democracy in Iran, California Women's Society for Democracy in Iran, and a registered dental hygienist. Pooran is married and mother of 2 kids and 3 grandkids. Pooran, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shukufe. Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Nowruz. I would like to thank Professor Judy Patasco for inviting us to this important event. Also, Miramar College for inviting us to this conference. Today, I would like to focus and talk about women's and girls' rights in Iran under current regime, the biggest violators of human rights. Since this regime came to power in 1979, more than 120,000 men, women, children, and even pregnant women have been executed. On December 16, 2020, for 67th time, United Nations bodies adopted resolution to condemn grave and systematic violations of human rights in Iran. Women in Iran are deprived of freedom in their basic rights. Government imposes mandatory dress code, which even Christian women need to obey. Women cannot travel without permission from their husband or their father. And according to Sharia law, women inherit half of what a man would. And compensation for the death of a woman is half of a man. And in some instances, they are forced to marry at a very young age, and there is no law to protect them. In a recent report to Human Rights Council by Mr. Javed Rahman, a United Nations rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Iran, he said, women and girls continue to be treated as the second-class citizens in Iran, and citing domestic violence, thousands of marriages of girls aged between 10 to 14 each year, and continue to say that one of the most concerning issues in Iran today when it comes to the rights of women and girls is the issues of child marriage. The report also says that between March and September 2020, over 16,000 girls aged 10 to 14 years old married, according to official government figures. On March 9, 2021, Mr. Rahman said, the current legal marriage age is simply unacceptable, very harmful for the girls' well-being, development, education, violence, and asked the government of Iran to raise the marriage age. Regime of Iran fears the women who fight against brutality, misogynist laws, and are willing to sacrifice and pay the ultimate price for freedom and justice. Under current president in Iran, Hassan Rouhani, at least 114 women have been executed, and many are still in prison with lengthy sentences. Today, I would like to talk about few of these brave women who are not afraid of this brutal regime and are adamant to confront the regime for their basic rights and the rights of all women and girls. Mariam Akbari Monfared. Mother of 3 daughters, has been in prison since 2009 without a single day of furlough. She was arrested on December 31st, 2009, after uprising that year and got 15 years prison sentences. Her crime, participating in a peaceful protest requiring about whereabouts of her brother and sister who were executed by regime and chanting anti-government slogans while in prison. Last week, in her 12th year of imprisonment, she was forcefully and without her knowledge was transferred to out-of-state prison in Semnan to put more pressure on her, her family, and loved ones. Golrokh Irai, a writer, human rights activist, advocating against stoning. She was sentenced to 6 years in prison for writing an unpublished book against stoning and defending human rights. She was forcefully dragged by her hair to relocate to out-of-state prison. Her husband, Arash Sadeghi, a political and civil rights activist, was sentenced to 19 years in prison and currently serving his prison time. Both Golrokh and Arash went to a very dire hunger strike to protest against their prison sentences and unbelievable situation in prison. She is deprived of visiting her husband or calling him. Nasreen Sotoudeh, 57-year-old human rights lawyer. After grossly unfair trial, she was sentenced to 38 years and 6 months in prison and 148 lashes for defending human rights, representing human rights activists, and prisoners sentenced to death for crime committed while they were minor, and also for protesting against forced hijab wearing laws. And last but not least, Athena Daemi, a civil rights, children's rights, and human rights activist, was sentenced to 14 years in prison. Authorities gave her extra 2-year sentences and 74 lashes while serving her prison term. Her alleged crime, propaganda against the state, and disrupting prison's order. There are regimes' tactics to add more sentences to make sure they stay in prison as long as possible, since regime of Iran sees its destruction in women's hands. These women that I named are only the tip of the iceberg. There are so many other women all over Iran in prison, tortured, and executed for their beliefs. Baha'is, Christians, Sufis, Sunnis, ethnic minorities, religious minorities, and human rights activists, and no clue about whereabouts of so many of them. But despite all atrocities by Mullah's regime in Iran, the real truth is that women of Iran are strong, steadfast fighters, will not give up and will not give in, and pay ultimate price when it comes to human rights, because they believe that human rights and women's rights, justice and freedom are a basic rights and absolute necessities for a prosperous and well-being of a community. The bravery of women in Iran, their passion for human rights and justice, encouraged me to join California Women Society for Democracy in Iran, to be able to focus my support for the women in Iran and echo their voice, and stay on the side of resistance in Iran and outside Iran. We believe women are a pivotal force for change. So we will not give up. We will gather all our strength to be their voice and fight for human rights, freedom, and justice, not only for the people and women of Iran, but women all over the world. We urge the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights and international human rights organizations to take actions to secure the release of political prisoners and human rights activists in Iran. Also, it would be appropriate for an international delegation to visit the prisons in Iran and meet with the prisoners to investigate their situations in prison. I would like to ask all of you to join us in this fight and be the voice of women in any way possible, and ask your representatives to support Iranian women in their struggle for freedom and democracy. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I am very grateful to be able to talk to all of you. Thanks again for inviting California Women's Society for Democracy in Iran to this very important conference. Have a wonderful evening, everyone, and happy Nowruz again. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pooran. Thank you so much for being a voice for our sisters in Iran. Thank you for sharing their pictures and saying their name. We won't forget them. And this year, as we said at our sofras, we will think of them and we will pray for a free Iran very soon so we can celebrate with them. Thank you so much, Pooran.